In the next segment, we'll explore the Beatles' mentorship of the band Badfinger and what the outcome looked like for each of them. The catalyst for my deep dive into the history of this nearly forgotten band called Badfinger was the last scene of the last episode of the hit TV series Breaking Bad, which aired in 2017. Millions of fans, including me and my kids, were glued to their screens for the finale. The show ended with the main character dying in the lab where he cut his beloved blue meth. And the song that wrapped it up was none other than Baby Blue by Badfinger. I suddenly realized what a great band they were and wondered what had happened to them. Turns out I wasn't alone in that curiosity, as thousands of viewers downloaded the song that evening, putting it back on the charts for a short time. A few weeks later, I began an informal school of rock with my daughter Sarah and her friend Chandler, and the first class was on the subject of Badfinger. Here's a band that was discovered by the Beatles and mentored by them to become the next English supergroup for the 70s, the heir apparent to the Beatles. They had a major record deal, and they toured extensively in Europe and the US. Why then aren't we more familiar with Badfinger, given that strong foundation and backing? Let's go back to the beginning and trace their journey. Imagine the excitement of the Ivies when their manager, Bill Collins, moved them to London, the headquarters of Beatlemania, and provided them with housing and occasional bookings. The band had been slugging it out for 5 long years, performing in their hometown of Swansea in southern Wales, and now their chances of being discovered were greatly improved. Collins, an aging rock star wannabe, was a taskmaster, doling out a 10-pound weekly allowance to each band member, keeping all the girls away from the house, and encouraging the band members to write and record original material in his makeshift basement recording studio. If you're familiar with the TV show Silicon Valley, you might think of Collins as a sort of Erlich Bachman, and the Ivies as Pied Piper, of course. After the band had been in London about 2 years, Collins, who was a Liverpool native, was able to leverage a connection to the Beatles' favorite roadie, Mal Evans, who heard their performance one night and was blown away. He immediately introduced the Ivies to the legendary Beatles, who loved them, and they quickly became the first band signed to the new Apple record label. Well, second band technically, because the Beatles were the first, right? Here was their ticket to ride, so to speak. They had made it to the major leagues. Or had they? Things moved like quicksand with Apple Records. All efforts at that time were focused on the Beatles, of course, and the other acts on the label were a distant second priority. It was hard to get management to champion their cause, and their early releases failed to chart. A name change was suggested because the Ivies was just not memorable. Thus, the change to Badfinger. Still not a great name, but much more memorable, right? Every song they submitted to Apple was rejected, and it appeared their debut album was being stalled indefinitely. Enter Paul McCartney for a heroic move. He witnessed the band's frustration and happened to be dealing with his own frustration at that time. You see, Paul had agreed to write the score for a Peter Sellers movie called The Magic Christian, ironically a movie about mentorship. And it was a distraction from his main mission, which was the completion of the legendary Beatles' Abbey Road album. Ever heard of that? He'd written a surefire hit song for the movie called Come and Get It. And by offloading the movie project to the band and giving them the hit song, Paul was able to focus on his masterpiece, and Badfinger had their first smash hit. Only problem was that it wasn't their song. They had to perform it Paul's way, exactly his way. And the result was what sounded like a new Beatles song. The band's leader, Pete Ham, was one of the great songwriters of his day. One night, he was leaving for the studio and saw his girlfriend's disappointment that they weren't going to go out. A few hours later, he writes, "Oh, I can't forget this evening, your face as we were leaving. I guess that's just the way the story goes. You always smile, but in your smile, your sorrow shows." In one evening, Pete and bandmate Tom Evans had written and recorded the band's greatest song, Without You, which unfortunately never charted as a Badfinger hit. Let's watch this clip of the band performing the song and note the number of views on YouTube.
I can't live if living is without you. I can't live, I can't give anymore.
Imagine the band's surprise when back in the studio a year later, they ran into Harry Nilsson, a not so well-known American pop singer who had something to play for them. He was recording his new album in the same complex and had completed what was to be his biggest hit, a cover of Without You. His version, however, pulled out all the stops, took the song to its full potential, went to #1 on the charts and stayed there for many weeks. Let's watch a clip of Harry Nilsson's version and note the number of views on this one.
I can't live if living is without you. I can't give anymore.
Pete and Tom were shocked, realizing that the world would remember this as a Harry Nilsson song and not as a Badfinger song. 35 years later, it happened all over again when Mariah Carey performed Without You and took it to a whole new level as a #1 smash hit for herself and a new generation of listeners. Let's see a clip of Mariah Carey's version and note the number of views. Wow. The Without You incident drove Pete Ham to step up his game, as he wanted to be known for the great songs he wrote. So for the third Badfinger album, Straight Up, he got Apple to bring in the big guns, with Todd Rundgren producing, and none other than George Harrison as a guest artist. This album contains my favorite Badfinger song, Day After Day. Let's listen to part of it.
Looking out from my lonely room, day after day. Bring it home, baby, make it soon. I give my love to
I've loved this song since I was a kid, but I never knew the backstory on it. I did know, I think, that George Harrison played the guitar on it, and you can hear the slide guitar on this song is classic George Harrison. It's unmistakable. But I didn't know the rest of it. So they were recording in the studio, and George would from time to time bring in talent. Like if you saw the Beatles Get Back sessions, you saw how Billy Preston just wandered in the studio one day and wound up being the fifth Beatle for the whole Get Back album. So on this particular day, they're in the studio recording Day After Day and doing overdubs, and George's buddy Leon Russell comes in. Leon says, "Hey, would y'all like me to play piano on this?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure, Leon, that'd be awesome." And so Leon sits down at the piano, and they're listening to the playback of the song, and George Harrison is sitting at the console with the engineer, and he whispers to him, "Are the mics not on? Why isn't Leon playing?" And the engineer said, "Of course the mics are on. Leon's just not playing." Then at the end of the song, George asks, "Hey, Leon, could you hear okay?" And Leon says, "Oh yeah, man, I was just listening, getting the hang of it, and now I'm ready to groove. Let's do it." And in one take, Leon does this classic part on Day After Day, which really, honestly, makes the song, along with the slide guitar from George. So Leon Russell, go figure, was in the Badfinger and Beatles story. So the Beatles, especially Paul McCartney and George Harrison, really stepped up as mentors, doing everything they could do to help Badfinger realize success. But the Beatles' strength was in their songwriting, and their weakness was in management, which is where Badfinger sadly needed the most help. Remember, the Beatles had their own set of lucky breaks 10 years earlier, and one of the biggest was finding a great manager in Brian Epstein. Badfinger's manager, Bill Collins, was a small fish. and he knew it. He also knew that his band's biggest opportunity was in America, where they had the greatest popularity. So in 1970, Collins took the band to New York to secure a Big Fish manager. Incidentally, one of the straws leading to the breakup of the Beatles was that John really wanted to work with a new manager, Alan Klein, who was managing the Rolling Stones at that time. Paul vehemently did not want to work with Klein, as he correctly read him as one who looked after his own interests ahead of the interests of his clients. However, a needed step that Klein accomplished was the cleanup of the badly managed Apple Records. He was hemorrhaging money. The resulting house cleaning meant that Apple's artists, including Badfinger, got even less support from the label. So Badfinger didn't just need a major league manager, they needed a new record label as well. In New York, the band was introduced to Stan Polly, who indeed appeared to be a big-time Big Fish manager of performing artists. Polly chauffeured them around the city in a big limo, and between puffs on his big Cuban cigar, told them all about the lay of the land in America. The band was enamored with Polly and signed with him immediately. Polly then set up a corporation, which he controlled, and had all funds from recording and performing flow through it. He paid out the expenses of touring and recording, but very little flowed down to the band members because Polly paid himself 30% of gross proceeds, an unheard of amount that left nothing after expenses to compensate the band members. Now, Bill Collins was still actively involved. He had a 20% interest in the net proceeds alongside the 4 band members, but was way out of his element when it came to contracts and cash flows. Given the debacle with Apple Records, Polly was able to sign Badfinger to a new contract with Warner Brothers, which paid an unprecedented $300,000 advance, given the band's massive popularity at that time. But what happened to the money? Suddenly, nothing was getting paid, especially the band, and everything ground to a halt. Warner Brothers sued. Stan Polly was unreachable. With a million-selling hit day after day, 2 gold records, and a smash hit covered by Harry Nilsson, the band couldn't scrape together enough money to buy a sandwich. Pete Ham, now married and with a child on the way, fell into a deep depression as he began to realize the fatal mistake the band had made. In a night of deepest despair, he hung himself. 8 tortured years later, his bandmate, Tom Evans, hung himself as well. Entrepreneurs know firsthand just how high the highs can be and just how low the lows can be. But imagine these guys, blessed by the gods of pop and well on their way to superstardom, and then hitting that brick wall that stopped everything in its tracks. But this is where the metaphor of comparing rock stars to entrepreneurs breaks down. An entrepreneur is wired with eternal optimism that's never extinguished, no matter how bad things get. There are so many stories of startups, out of time and out of money, that have pulled the rabbit out of the hat and had that magical breakthrough that turned it all around. Pete and Tom should have realized that their talent was intact, 100%, and that they could possibly regroup and rebound. Here are the lessons that both entrepreneurs and mentors can take away from Badfinger's cautionary tale. The obvious lesson is the importance of doing one's homework when it comes to an important hire, even when the person comes through a warm referral, which was certainly how Bill Collins met Stan Polly. Haven't most of us been guilty of shortcutting the process when a warm referral seems to perfectly fit with the skills that are needed? I know I have. The Stan Polly story is a sobering reminder of the importance of fully vetting a candidate, no matter how strong the referral. Next, make sure the unit economics work. This is where good mentorship can be extremely helpful. Neither Bill Collins nor Pete Ham had the knowledge that paying a manager 30% of gross proceeds was unworkable. But the Beatles sure should have known better and advised against it. A great mentor not only helps the entrepreneur accelerate the growth, but also to avoid some of the pitfalls along the way. Next, there's no way around paying the dues and building the years of experience that's required for a successful launch and execution, whether it's in a band or in a business. Badfinger spent 7 long years honing their skills prior to that overnight success in 1968. Sounding like the Beatles was both a blessing and a curse. While it might expedite things to be comparable to something wildly successful, It's vital for a band or a business to develop its uniqueness and competitive advantage. Next, timing is everything when it comes to being a smash hit versus a passing fad. The Beatles had exactly the right product at the right place and at the just right time when they arrived in New York in 1964 and went on that famous episode of The Ed Sullivan Show. America was ready. Badfinger, however, arguably was bringing a product from the 60s into the 70s. New fads like glam rock, disco, and punk were about to arrive. Artists like Elton John and David Bowie navigated the trend lines of consumer demand much better than Badfinger through the 70s and beyond. For the entrepreneur, it's important to determine whether the value proposition is truly leading edge, not bleeding edge, and not past its prime, but just right. Next, if you're going to change the world, you have to go all in and be the very best. Badfinger wrote a song that stood the test of time without you, yet their performance of it was tepid, as they realized when they heard Harry Nilsson's version. I love the example of the iPhone. Steve Jobs would have still disrupted the world with his revolutionary pocket computer posing as a phone, even if it looked more like a next-gen BlackBerry. But he went the extra mile with the packaging. Think about it, the polished glass and the impenetrable enclosure all made the iPhone beyond special. Finally, one of the toughest junctures in the startup journey is when the business expands beyond the entrepreneur's capacity and higher caliber experience has to be recruited. Bill Collins knew he was beyond his depth in managing the business side of Badfinger, and he took the right steps to source that next level talent, but the results were obviously disastrous. A great mentor can help the entrepreneur navigate these dangerous waters. Great entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Michael Dell, and even Mark Zuckerberg were each able to identify areas of weakness and fill them with world-class talent. So many more entrepreneurs are unsuccessful with this, especially those that are uncomfortable hiring people more experienced and capable than themselves. I think about this a lot myself because I provide seed capital and mentorship for startups that are in their infancy. And I've often struggled to help the entrepreneur cross that chasm to the next stage funding and talent. Perhaps the most important help a mentor can provide to the entrepreneur is to help connect the dots from where they hope to be back to where they are today.